On this episode of Things That Matter, I'm going to have a conversation with my friend Kellen Criswell, and we're going to talk about my recent trip to the Middle East, ministry in Europe, and church planting around the world. So stay tuned. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Things That Matter. I'm your host, Brian Brodersen, and here in the studio with me today is my friend Kellen Criswell. Kellen is the director of the Calvary Global Network, and we're here to just have a conversation, just talk about some of the things that we've recently been involved in on kind of a global level. And it's also going to be the last episode of this particular season, so we'll kind of wind things down at the end of the broadcast here. But Kellen, it's good to be together.
It's good to be back.
So let's talk. Let's have a conversation. You've been a lot of places recently. I have been a lot of places. I just came back from the Middle East, and that was really, really tremendous. So
yeah. And you were in the UK recently as well.
I spent a month. I actually spent a month in Europe over the summer, August, which is a normal thing for us. You know, we spend a lot of time in the UK. We go over to Austria and do a conference for our ministries, churches throughout the European region there, both Western and Eastern, and then we've been doing an outreach up in Scotland as well. So we did all of that over the month of August, and then we came back for a few weeks, and then we turned around and headed over to the Middle East and did a conference in Cyprus, which was fantastic. And actually, I've only been home a couple of days, as you know, so it's all kind of fresh on my mind.
Yeah, it's awesome, the opportunities that you guys are having. I just was out with our good buddy George Scanlon. We went several countries in Eastern Europe mostly, but then to Italy and to Ireland as well. And that's great. And I'm glad you actually brought that up the way you did, because I think on kind of a funny side note as we get into talking about this today, I think a lot of times people see your Instagram posts and stuff and, hey, where's Brian today? Kind of a thing. And I think that sometimes people maybe have an impression that that's just all coffees and chilling. And sometimes people don't understand the intensity of these trips that you're on and what you're really there doing. You're not just there on a glorified vacation every couple months, right?
No, and if you want to know more of the details, talk to my wife, because she's like, I cannot believe it. You didn't give us a single minute throughout the day. Everything was packed. I'm so exhausted. I'll give you an example. We flew from LA through London into Tel Aviv, and we got to bed at 1 a.m. On a Monday night. At 5 on Tuesday morning, we were up. We drove into Jerusalem, spent the day there, did some ministry, did some teaching, got back to our hotel at 11 that night. Wow, so that's the kind of schedule that we kept. So you need a few coffees here and there just to stay awake.
Got to survive, right?
Exactly, yeah. And then occasional, like a Haagen-Dazs or something,
of course,
or a good gelato.
Of course, that's like the MRE of traveling missionaries, right? The Haagen-Dazs. Yeah, but I mean, what are you guys doing? Like, so you're out doing some outreach and sharing the gospel, some ministry with pastors.
Yeah, on this particular trip, we're just, in one sense, we're kind of just building relationships that we have with folks in the Middle East, and just coming alongside on a kind of a personal level, really, and just trying to be an encouragement. We have a Bible school in Jerusalem, Calvary Chapel Bible College, and so I like to go over and visit our school and spend a little bit of time with the students, and we got to do that on this trip. And you just meet with some interesting people. I met with the pastor, vicar, I don't know what title he uses, but Christ Church in Jerusalem at the Jaffa Gate is the oldest Protestant church in the city. Wow. And this guy David, he's the head of the church. I'm not sure. He's an Anglican. I'm not sure if he goes by the title of vicar. But just to spend some time with him, just to talk about kind of the history of the ministry there, fascinating stuff, and to see what God's doing through all of the different ministries in the country. Met with a good friend who pastors the oldest Messianic congregation in Jerusalem, had lunch with him, caught up on what's happening in his church, and he's kind of recently become the pastor of the church, succeeded his dad, who's gone to be with the Lord. His dad was a pioneer of Messianic ministry into the country. So to kind of just hear about what the Lord is doing in that congregation and what the Lord is doing in the Jewish community was just fascinating stuff. And everybody I know, every believer I know in Israel, they're all saying the same thing, that although there aren't multitudes of people, coming to put their faith in Jesus as the Messiah, there is an interest and an openness like none of them have ever seen in their entire lives. So people are curious. My friend told me the story of being invited to a meeting, walks in, there's about 20 very influential people, doctors, scientists, professors, and they're all together studying the Gospel of John. They're not believers in the sense of they're not Messianic believers even. They're Jews, some religious, some not, but they're really intrigued with Jesus and they want to know more about him. So he gets to walk into this situation, and of course they recognize he's they refer to him as a rabbi. He's a Messianic rabbi. So they just said, well, Rabbi, what do you think about this Gospel of John? What is John's point? And he said, well, I'm glad you asked. And so you hear stories like that, and you just realize, man, the Lord is doing some really good stuff. I found out another fascinating thing that I did not know. I was talking to a friend who's a PhD student at Ben Gurion University, and he said this to me. He goes, I don't know if you know this or not. He said, but right in the center of our university, there is a bust of Ben Gurion, and it was donated to the university by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And he says it right there. It says donated to the university, Ben Gurion University by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, 1984, whatever the date was. And he's like, you should come over and you could probably, speak to the faculty at the university because after all, your church donated
that
this
relationship.
Bust. And I thought, wow, that's that was amazing to find out. So
that's cool.
Yeah, so that was great. And then we went to Cyprus and had a fantastic time. We actually had a conference in Cyprus, and people from the region, coming to be refreshed and encouraged. And we got a wonderful church in the city of Paphos in Cyprus. And the significance of Paphos is that's where Paul and Barnabas went and preached the gospel to Sergius Paulus. So it's amazing just to be in that world and to think, wow, the gospel has been in this place for 2,000 years, and to walk through the ruins, and there's all kinds of myths about what Paul did or didn't do when he was there. If they just stuck with the biblical text, it's a great story in and of itself. I don't need to mythologize it. So, but to kind of answer the question, our objective was really to go and encourage, and just to encourage the believers, the different works in the countries, whether they're churches or different ministries, or sometimes just individuals, that you see God's got his hand. There's a handful of young Israelis that the Lord has connected us with, and they're just so precious. They're great. We've become really good friends. And they're all involved in different kinds of things, but just to I kind of feel like these are the Peter, James, and Johns of this generation. So you want to just come alongside and just encourage them in the Spirit. Just encourage what God's doing in their life, and don't know where it's going, but you just have a sense that the Lord's got his hand on these guys. So
I think about that verse. I've been thinking about it a lot lately in Hebrews, where it talks, the author referring to the priests says that no man takes this ministry unto himself, and it's a verse I think about with you, because you have all these opportunities, all these relationships, all this influence that God's really given you guys to, you're a pastor to pastors around the world, and that's not something you're taking on yourself. That's something that guys have given to you. And so you have this opportunity to travel, to be involved in the work that God's doing in so many places. And knowing you, I know that's not something that you claw and fight for and scratch for. It's just literally God has placed this in your life. And but because of that, you get to observe the work of God in many different contexts. And so I wanted to ask you, based on that, and especially, you're fresh, coming off trips in two very distinct, what are to us international mission fields in the Middle East and then in Europe and the UK. Yeah. And so with the opportunities that you have to go and be involved and to see, what are some common points that you're seeing in terms of how God is working around the world right now?
Yeah. Here's the kind of the dichotomy. You've got on the surface level, where kind of everybody can see, regardless of who you are. You can see it on the news and read in the newspapers and all. Everything is kind of crazy and chaotic, and
so wars and rumors of wars,
and rumors of wars, and cultural kind of craziness and all of this. So you've got that, and I think if you just see that, you can easily get discouraged and think, man, the world's just going, down the tubes. And, you might not recognize that in the midst of this and kind of under the radar, the Lord is at work. And that's the thing that I see, so whether it's the UK, where you've got a lot of kind of social craziness going on, you got the Brexit situation, and you got the pro and those who are for it, those who are against it. You've got, Europe. You've got Islam. You've got that in the Middle East majorly. So you have this stuff, and I think the temptation is to just think that, man, the world is just racing toward hell, and there's no stopping it. But if you get down a little deeper under the surface, you find that, God is actually at work in these places. And there's an undercurrent of the work of the Spirit. And that's what really, encourages me. And it kind of, it keeps me personally from sort of, losing it myself. When I look at all the crazy stuff going on in the culture, whether it's there or here, I just come back to, but God's working in the middle of it. And Kellen, we've been planting churches for years. I mean, that's kind of one of the major things that we do, beside pastoring and teaching and all. But my firm conviction is that we just need good, solid Bible believing, Christ-centered, gospel preaching churches in every town and village and city in the world. Amen. If we had that, man, that everything would be different. And wherever you find that happening, you find that there's a difference in those places. And so our goal really, obviously is to be led by the Spirit in these things, but we just want to continue to encourage, whether it's sending people or coming alongside of nationals who are there in their own cultural context. And in some places, I'm recognizing nowadays that the day of sending people into certain cultures is kind of over. Not entirely everywhere, obviously, but in a lot of places, it's much more difficult to get visas. It's much more difficult to stay long-term in certain places these days. So that's forced us to have to look at the nationals that are there and recognize that the future is probably more with them, and our role then is a coming alongside role, and just encouraging them in the work.
Yeah, that's great. I'm a missiology nerd, so I listen to lots of podcasts with missiologists and read a lot about those kinds of things. And one of the definitions, or part of the components that missiologists use in talking about what it looks like for a place to be considered reached, is Indigenous leadership. Yeah. That are not just, so there's not just a church planted, but there's a church that's planted that has national Indigenous leaders that's also leading a national Indigenous church to also then go cross-cultural as well. Yeah. And one of the things that is talked about a lot, and I think rightfully so, is one of the keys to that is the issue of leadership development, and especially in terms of thinking of the relationship between maybe the, at one time, foreigner who comes over. So like in Calvary Chapel, for instance, in CGN, we have churches all over the world, and that means in many cases a Westerner has gone to the non-West or to Europe or something and planted a church, and somebody's been raised up. And a lot of times, in many cases, we've kind of, okay, our job is done, the national's there, so we're going to leave. And I think that what many are talking about, what we're observing, and as we travel on, do ministry with our relationships, is that there's a great need for us to realize the need for a different kind of relationship, that just raising up a national isn't enough, but then also having more of Paul the Apostle's approach of then let's go back and strengthen the churches, and that ongoing relationship of mentoring and empowering for. Are you seeing that too?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a thing that I'm, very convinced that we need to be thinking more in those terms and doing more of that. And we are actually doing that. God has taken guys that had, maybe spent 20, 25 years on the mission field, and through various circumstances, pulled them out of their situation where they were maybe pioneered a church, maybe were leading a, kind of a smaller movement even. Yeah. And, they passed everything on to the nationals. The Lord's pulled them back. But, now what he's doing is he's taking them and he's sending them into more regional influence, where they can come along. And, a lot of times, Kellen, guys just need, they need to sit down and just have a coffee and just talk and just, I was just in Cyprus, but I was with a Russian friend who actually came from, outside of the Moscow area. And, there was a point he just said, can we just sit down? I just really need to talk with you. So we went over and we sat and we had I think we had an ice cream actually, rather than a coffee. And, but it's those kinds of things where I've known this guy for many, many years. He's at a season in his life and ministry where he's really kind of not crystal clear about what the future holds. And so he's, trusts me to speak into his life, and I'm happy to do that. And so, but we're seeing that, right now as we're talking, two of our mutual friends are on that kind of a journey throughout Italy, going along and just coming and visiting the existing churches and just spending a day or two with the guys and just encouraging them. Because, when you're out in a place where you've got, maybe two churches, like-minded churches that you really feel like you connect in an entire country. I mean, you're on your own out there.
Yeah, right.
And you desperately long for somebody to just come and hang out with you for a little bit, So I'm looking at a number of guys who are my age, we're all in, late 50s, early 60s, and I'm seeing that the Lord is basically freeing guys up from their responsibilities, whether they've pastored for years or whatever, and putting on their hearts to take on a bit more of this kind of apostolic role in the sense
like
of
a mentoring,
mentoring, encouraging, just strengthening the existing churches. So that's a needed thing.
Yeah, that's great. And it's I'm just one guy, but just we travel a bit, and my family just spent a year living in Hungary, as you know, and we got to travel quite a bit in Eastern Europe and several places. And just the more I talk with guys like you, have my own experiences, observations, talk with our missions pastor, John Chubik, who's, guy travels like 250 days a year, doing ministry, doing the things that we're talking about. My sense is that there's kind of a growing consensus that this issue of leaders who have a lot of experience, but they still got a lot of gas in the tank. Moving into this role where kind of that go back and strengthen the churches kind of mentality, it seems like there's a growing consensus that is at the heart of what is going to enable Calvary Chapel and CGN to have kind of push through that into that next wall into fruitfulness in international missions. Is that your sense of the situation? Or?
Yeah, and I think too, sometimes you have to step back from things and you have to kind of rethink them. So recently in a conference that we did in Europe back in the summer, I'm looking out at this group of guys, and I know all of them pretty well, and I've known many of them for quite some time. And I'm looking at kind of where they're located and what's happening. I'm thinking, here's a guy who's, just amazing. He's gifted, but he's been plowing for years and years in this place, and there isn't much happening. So, Now, of course, in his mind, he just needs to keep doing that, even though he's discouraged, even though he's like wondering, why am I doing this? And sometimes he needs somebody else to come along and say, hey, maybe we need to rethink this. Maybe your gifts are not being used to the fullest potential, because maybe this just isn't the place at this time where you need to be expending all of your energy. So let's think about some other possibilities. So I'm thinking of one guy in my mind who's very capable, and I just said to him, I said, look, I know of 2 other places around Europe where they are actually, there's a congregation and they're looking for a pastor. So I think you should consider those places. Both cases, he's a multilingual guy. In both cases, you would need to be at least bilingual. So he fit into that. Now, I haven't had any follow-up conversation with him, although I saw on Instagram that he actually did visit and preach at one of those churches. So that excited me to see. So I think what I'm saying is I think that we, the danger is to just kind of settle into something and you just get sort of cemented in it, and it's like, well, this is the way we do it, this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way we're going to do it forever. There comes a time where you need to kind of just rethink everything and just say, okay, this is what we've been doing, and maybe it's time to do something a little bit different. So just that leading of the Spirit. And like I was saying earlier, it used to be we just look for, who can we take and send out. And now we're having to reconsider that. Now, sending somebody, there's a lot of hoops. There's a lot of immigration issues. There's a lot of visa, challenges. There's financial, countries, whether they know they're doing this or not, whether they're doing it intentionally or it's just the working of the enemy behind the scenes, they're making it harder and harder for people to come in with the gospel. So again, we have to maybe re-strategize. We have to maybe rethink the way we've been doing it. We've been doing it one way for almost 30 years, but maybe we have to do it a different way now. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of thinking about as I'm...
Yeah, that's such a great encouragement. I mean, we're kind of talking about different sort of versions of adversity too, where there's the persecution, there's all of that. There's just, maybe it's the indirect challenges. And I think one thing that's important, and we talk about this a lot, but is just the church to have the right kind of God's perspective as we look on these kinds of challenges, whether it's developing leaders or dealing with government or whatever it is. And we mentioned wars and rumors of wars in Matthew 24. And that text, to me, it's so relevant to this kind of conversation, because I think we tend to get so focused on, what does it mean, kingdoms and rising against, and trying to figure out where all that's happening in our daily lives. But I think, for me, the key verse of that text is verse 14, where Jesus, kind of after describing all this crazy stuff that would be happening, said basically what you said, and he said, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached among all nations, and then the end will come. And just that, to me, that's a whole different perspective than leadership challenges are hard, government is hard, persecution's hard. Oh, this is so discouraging. Jesus looked at all that and said, and you know what? Kind of this resolve. This is the mentality that we should have. But like you're saying, it takes understanding that and knowing God's working. He's going to keep working. So how do we join him in that? Yeah,
because you can look at it and just think, maybe it's time for us to pull out or move on, or it's not what it was. A lot of these places we went into in a time in history where the floodgates were open, and we went in and we were preaching on the streets, and we were leading people to Christ right and left and starting churches, and it was all, and the government officials were opening the door saying, come on in, and the police were standing there saying, oh, we love what you're doing, and that has changed.
It's not the case very often anymore.
So I think in the end, it's just a matter of continuing to be flexible, continuing to be seeking the Lord on, how do we fulfill the Great Commission? How do we engage in these places? And today, when you think of people going into places where they are literally risking their lives, I mean, that's a different ballgame. And we don't really understand that so much in the U.S. We really don't. We've got our own problems, obviously, and our own challenges. But, I was talking to a friend the other day, and he told me something that just absolutely blew my mind. He told me about, he's in a Muslim country, and he told me about, a guy who's come to Christ, and he's just amazing, and he's so passionate about the gospel. But he told me about an incident that happened before he came to the Lord, and when he told this guy something about his own background, the guy in his mind just began to think, when can I slit this guy's throat? And of course, he didn't tell him that, but he asked him later. He said, what did you think when I told you this? And he said, well, I began to think, how can I get you alone and slit your throat?
Wow.
And he was dead serious. And he said, thank God the guy's a brother and a believer now. Yeah. We're co-laboring in the gospel. But, we've got our challenges. We've got our problems here in, the U.S. But we don't have a whole lot of that kind of stuff.
That's a different kind of adversity.
It's a different kind of adversity, yeah. But to see these guys just say, but God's called us here. And so we're going to just keep pressing in and pressing forward. So it's great. One of the things before we wrap up that I thought was really cool when you came back from your journey there was when you told me that you had ended up coming across the path of guys from a couple of other church planting networks. We don't need to name them, but just the willingness and the eagerness even to partner for the kingdom. And that's something that is near and dear to my heart, and I know it's near and dear to your heart as well. And that's kind of part of the vision of the Global Network, is that we want to work together with like-minded people to just see the gospel advance.
Right. That it's essential if we're going to fulfill the Great Commission task that God has given the church. Here where we are at Calvary Costa Mesa, there's 300 Calvary chapels within a 100-mile radius. Just Calvary chapels, right? And there's millions of lost people, we get that. But, in one of those particular places where I was at having that meeting, I had no idea that this guy directed this particular network until we got in the conversation. And part of that conversation came to be about, well, how could our networks work together? Because we don't have every fine point of our soteriology in agreement. We don't have several probably other things, but we have the real Jesus, one faith, one Lord, one baptism, one Spirit, one gospel in common. And so the reality is in places like that, this particular guy was in northern Italy where there's city after city of thousands and hundreds of thousands that have nothing. They have no other evangelical churches. And so if you're not going to have a collaborative mindset, we kind of have the luxury of just deciding to hang out in our, as one guy I heard recently put it, ecclesiastical ghetto. We just kind of hang out with our team. We have that luxury a lot of times in the States. You don't have, that's not a global luxury that the church has. And so if you're going to have this narrow mind of, I only hang out with guys who fly the same banner or have every little secondary doctrine in common with me, you're going to be alone and you're probably going to die, So it's a crucial thing.
And almost everybody I know that has been out of, the context of the U.S., everybody in our, family of churches, they know that by experience, because you get out there and you realize, oh, wow, it's the Baptist guy here, it's the Pentecostal guy over there, it's the Anglican or the Methodist or whatever. These are God's people in this place, and I need to connect with them because I don't have any other options.
And we can have debates in the context of relationship. We can have discussions, but we can also work together.
It's great. Just coming back from Israel, these Israeli guys, these Jewish believers born and raised in the land and all of that. And, they definitely have their own perspective on a lot of things. And, you would think like prophecy, for example, because, we're all about, prophecy and the second coming. I was talking to one of the Messianic pastors and he's like, he goes, I don't even bother with prophecy. I just tell him, the Lord's coming and, whatever, all of that. But, we got to get the gospel to people, and I thought, interesting,
I don't see it exactly the same way, but does it break your relationship,
All right, so good. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, so this is our last episode of this season, season 2. So we're going to come back mid-January
Right.
with season 3. So we're going to be praying and kind of, considering where we go. We've had, I think, season 2 has been good. We've had a lot of great
30 strong episodes.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of great guys in for interviews. And we'll probably have some of those guys back to talk more specifically about, certain issues and things.
New topics, some new guests.
But we're open to having other guys too. And if you're a subscriber, if you're somebody who is blessed by the program, feel free to shoot us an email and give us a suggestion. Maybe a topic that you want to hear us talk about, or maybe a person that you'd like to see us interview. We would be happy to consider that. So, Kellen, thanks for hanging out today.
Good to hang.